Tomorrow morning, you'll wake up carrying the most incredible secret locked inside your DNA, a secret so devastating that it nearly erased humanity from existence forever. Every person walking this planet today descended from an impossibly small group of just 1,280 survivors who somehow managed to outlast the most catastrophic event in human history. This revelation emerged when geneticists analyzed DNA from over 3,000 individuals across every continent, expecting routine results but instead uncovering evidence of humanity's closest brush with total extinction. What they discovered shattered everything we thought we knew about our origins. Using groundbreaking genetic archaeology called FitCoal, researchers traced genetic signatures backward through millennia, following molecular breadcrumbs until they hit something extraordinary. Between 930,000 and 813,000 years ago, our species experienced a population collapse so severe that it reduced roughly 100,000 early humans down to merely 1,280 breeding individuals. A staggering 98.7% reduction that lasted for 117,000 years. Consider this perspective. If such devastation struck today's 8 billion people, only 100 million would survive. But our ancestors started with far fewer numbers, making their survival even more miraculous. These weren't modern humans with technology, medicine, or advanced tools. These were primitive beings lacking fire control, proper shelter construction, or sophisticated hunting equipment, yet they endured conditions that would eliminate us within weeks. The genetic fingerprint of this bottleneck exists in every cell of your body right now. When populations thrive, DNA lineages branch outward like sprawling oak trees, taking extensive time to trace common ancestry. However, when populations crash dramatically, these genetic pathways suddenly compress through an incredibly narrow funnel, milius exactly what scientists observed from 900,000 years ago. This molecular traffic jam forced nearly every surviving human lineage through the same tiny group of ancestors. Mountain gorillas currently number around 1,000 individuals, and we consider them critically endangered. Black rhinoceros populations hover near 5,000, and we're desperately implementing conservation efforts. Our ancestors dropped below these numbers and remained there for over 100,000 years, approximately 4,000 generations of living on extinction's absolute edge. What caused such unprecedented devastation? The answer lies in Earth's most dramatic climate transformation, fundamentally altering how glacial periods functioned. Previously, ice ages arrived in manageable 40,000-year cycles with relatively moderate temperature variations. Around 900,000 years ago, our planet's climate machinery completely reorganized, initiating brutal 100,000-year glacial episodes far more severe than anything experienced before. This wasn't merely colder weather, it represented total environmental restructuring. Ocean currents that had flowed consistently for millions of years suddenly reversed course. Atmospheric circulation patterns maintaining stability for geological epochs became completely chaotic. Ice formations during these new glacial periods grew exponentially larger and persisted much longer than previous frozen eras. For species evolved in Africa's warm, stable tropical environments, this new climate regime spelled absolute disaster. The devastating peak occurred around 875,000 years ago, during marine isotope stage 22, creating apocalyptic conditions across multiple continents simultaneously. African forests that had flourished for millions of years began retreating rapidly in every direction. Expanding deserts consumed grasslands that had supported diverse ecosystems for countless generations. Rainfall patterns sustaining entire biological communities simply collapsed, creating widespread drought conditions. Lakes providing water for thousands of years completely dried up. Rivers flowing since before human existence became barren channels. The Sahara Desert, already formidable, expanded both northward and southward, devouring everything encountered. But Africa's suffering paled compared to Eurasian devastation, where early human populations had begun exploring. Massive ice sheets advanced from northern regions, reaching as far south as modern London locations. Permafrost expanded across enormous territories, creating frozen wastelands barely supporting life. The Tethys Ocean, moderating temperatures across southern Europe and Asia for millions of years, shrank dramatically. This eliminated crucial atmospheric moisture sources that countless species required for survival. Mountain glaciers throughout major ranges from Alps to Himalayas expanded extensively, forming frozen barriers that completely fragmented habitats and isolated populations. Climate models indicate that during crisis peaks, average global temperatures dropped 6 to 8 degrees Celsius below current levels. Continental interiors experienced winter temperatures plummeting 15 to 20 degrees Celsius below modern standards. Stable, predictable seasons humans had adapted to across hundreds of thousands of years became chaotic, unpredictable, and utterly hostile environments. The humans surviving this bottleneck confronted daily challenges seeming absolutely insurmountable by today's standards. Every survival aspect became exponentially more difficult when their familiar world collapsed completely around them. Fire control remained beyond their capabilities. Earliest definitive evidence for controlled fire usage appears at sites like Qusim Cave in Israel, dating approximately 790,000 years ago. It's near the bottleneck period's conclusion. Earlier fire traces exist, perhaps reaching back 1 million years, but these remain heavily debated and likely represent opportunistic usage of natural blazes, rather than creating and maintaining flames deliberately. Without fire mastery, surviving single winters in Ice Age conditions became nearly impossible. Raw meat consumption severely limited caloric extraction, while dramatically increasing disease risks from parasites and dangerous bacteria. Cooked food provides significantly more accessible nutrients and eliminates harmful pathogens, advantages completely unavailable to our struggling ancestors. These survivors possessed no advanced tools, sophisticated weapons, or protective clothing. They faced predators that would terrify modern humans: cave lions larger than today's African lions, massive cave bears, saber-toothed cats, and giant hyenas. Without fire's protective barrier, nighttime became periods of extreme vulnerability when most dangerous predators hunted actively. Shelter construction remained primitive. Natural caves provided protection when available, but most survivors likely constructed simple windbreaks from branches and animal hides. During severe storms or extreme cold snaps, such basic shelters offered minimal protection against elements that regularly killed the unprepared. Yet somehow, through sheer determination, incredible adaptability, and perhaps remarkable luck, this tiny group of ancestors managed to persist. They reproduced successfully, raised children under impossible circumstances, and maintained enough genetic diversity to eventually rebuild human populations when climate conditions finally improved. Their survival represents one of the most extraordinary achievements in evolutionary history, the testament to human resilience that continues flowing through every person alive today. Raw vegetation that could only become nourishing through heat treatment stayed forever beyond their reach. When darkness descended, they became helpless targets for nocturnal hunters possessing superior night vision. The merciless freeze of glacial winters attacked without mercy or respite whatsoever. Archaeological discoveries reveal that approximately 900,000 years ago, at locations like Happisburgh in England, early humans incredibly endured harsh northern winters lacking flame control or insulated garments. Contemporary researchers expressed genuine bewilderment at this accomplishment, struggling to comprehend such extraordinary endurance. Clothing presented equally dire circumstances. Advanced textile technology needed for creating fitted apparel wouldn't emerge for another 850,000 years. Bone needles and awls, fundamental sewing implements, remain absent from archaeological records until roughly 45,000 years ago. Bottleneck-era humans might have thrown animal pelts across their backs or wrapped themselves in crude skins, but lacking tailored garment construction, with proper stitching and fastenings, such coverings offered negligible protection against savage temperatures. During frozen winter months, they remained essentially unprotected against devastating environmental conditions. Their equipment arsenal, though remarkable compared to other creatures' capabilities, appeared crude by later human benchmarks. These forebears utilized basic Oldowan choppers and primitive Acheulean hand axes, essentially sharpened stones requiring direct manual operation. They possessed no projectile weaponry, no spears featuring meticulously crafted stone tips, no atlatls for amplifying throwing force and extending range, and definitely no bow and arrow systems. Hunting demanded approaching prey dangerously close, within arm's length, or perhaps a brief stride away. More frequently, they likely sustained themselves by salvaging remains abandoned by superior predators, competing directly with hyenas, vultures, and fellow scavengers for meat fragments and precious marrow. The predators confronting them were absolutely terrifying. Pleistocene landscapes teemed with saber-toothed cats, sporting fangs exceeding kitchen blade lengths, enormous hyenas capable of effortlessly crushing bones, colossal bears dwarfing any contemporary species, and lions surpassing modern counterparts in both size and ferocity. Without flame barriers protecting them during vulnerable nighttime hours, and lacking sophisticated defensive weapons, human groups remained extremely exposed, particularly when defending valuable carcasses or safeguarding elderly and juvenile members. Archaeological site evidence demonstrates humans frequently settling for remnants after apex predators finished feeding, indicated by cutting marks on bones positioned beneath carnivore tooth impressions. They operated as scavengers competing at the bottom of an exceptionally perilous food hierarchy. The nutritional intake, reconstructed from fossilized remains and coprolites, narrates continuous struggle and adaptation. When achievable, they consumed meat, evidenced by bone fragments discovered in fossilized human waste. However, meat acquisition remained unpredictable and hazardous. Large game demanded coordinated group cooperation and enormous risk-taking, while smaller creatures proved too swift or well-concealed for reliable capture. Botanical foods provided essential backup nutrition, though Ice Age climates rendered these increasingly sparse and seasonal. Tubers, nuts, fruits, and edible foliage that had sustained previous populations became scarce as woodlands retreated and grasslands completely withered. Surviving plants were frequently tough, fibrous, and challenging to digest without thermal processing. Envision attempting survival on uncooked roots and occasional meat scraps, while temperatures plunged dramatically below freezing, your stomach constantly aching with hunger, your frame trembling involuntarily, understanding that any miscalculation in locating sustenance or refuge could spell doom, not merely for yourself, but potentially your entire diminutive group. Social survival dynamics during this era transcended anything we can genuinely grasp today. With such catastrophically reduced populations, humans probably existed in minuscule bands of perhaps 20-30 individuals, scattered across enormous distances, requiring weeks or months to traverse. Locating mates beyond immediate groups would have proven extraordinarily difficult, resulting in unavoidable inbreeding still detectable in contemporary genetic codes. Genetic evidence confirms populations were severely fragmented and isolated, creating scattered networks of tiny human communities barely persisting across multiple continents. Nevertheless, despite confronting seemingly absolutely impossible challenges, they endured. They discovered sufficient nourishment to prevent starvation. They located adequate refuge to survive deadly cold. They possessed enough fortune and capability to evade countless stalking predators. Most importantly, they maintained sufficient resilience and optimism to continue procreating even as their environment disintegrated around them. Yet here's where this narrative takes an absolutely astonishing twist. As Africa transformed into an increasingly hostile and uninhabitable wasteland, something remarkable occurred. Rather than simply accepting extinction, certain human groups made what must have appeared like an impossible survival gamble. They chose to abandon everything familiar and venture into completely unexplored territories. Approximately 900,000 years ago, human archaeological sites begin appearing abruptly throughout Eurasia, signaling a massive migration surge coinciding precisely with the genetic bottleneck. This wasn't humanity's initial African departure attempt. Homo erectus had reached Asia by 1.8 million years ago, establishing settlements from Georgia to Java. However, those earlier dispersals occurred during relatively favorable climatic periods when Earth remained warmer and more welcoming. The migration commencing 900,000 years ago represented something completely different. This was movement born from absolute desperation, driven by understanding that remaining meant inevitable death. These weren't casual explorations or gradual expansions into adjacent regions. These were life or death expeditions undertaken by people who had gathered their complete existence and committed to making treacherous journeys into environments they had never witnessed, guided solely by hope and survival instincts. Migration logistics were astounding. Sea levels during glacial episodes dropped up to 120 meters, exposing enormous continental shelf areas and creating temporary land connections where none exist today. The Red Sea, typically a formidable barrier between Africa and Asia, periodically transformed into narrow waterways or salt lake series that determined travelers could cross on foot. But crossing exposed seabeds presented unique hazards. These temporary landscapes lacked established ecosystems, meaning limited food sources and virtually no fresh water. Travelers had to carry sufficient supplies for journeys potentially lasting weeks, while navigating unfamiliar terrain without landmarks or established pathways. Salt deposits left by retreating oceans created toxic environments where nothing edible grew, forcing migrants to traverse barren wastelands between livable areas. The courage required for these migrations defies modern comprehension. These weren't trained explorers with maps, compasses, or survival equipment. They were desperate families carrying children, elderly relatives, and minimal possessions, walking into complete unknowns because remaining guaranteed death. They possessed no knowledge of what lay ahead, whether they would find food, water, shelter, or encounter even more dangerous predators and environmental hazards. The Persian Gulf vanished completely during these reduced sea level episodes, transforming into a river valley providing natural pathways for human movement. These temporary passages offered escape routes from Africa, but they led toward territories frequently just as challenging and hostile as the conditions people were abandoning. Archaeological evidence for this desperate dispersal remains scattered yet absolutely convincing. At Atapuerca in Spain, Homo antecessor fossils, dating approximately 800,000 years ago, represent among the earliest known human populations in Western Europe. These discoveries might very well represent descendants of groups that escaped Africa during the bottleneck crisis peak. Even more astoundingly, at Happisburgh in England, preserved footprints in ancient mudflats demonstrate that humans had somehow reached Europe's extreme northwest by 900,000 years ago. Consider what this represents. These people were enduring latitudes where winter darkness persisted 16 hours daily, with temperatures regularly plummeting far below freezing, all lacking flame control, protective garments, or advanced equipment. Their survival and evidence preservation in such brutal conditions reveals incredible determination and adaptability levels. They were literally stepping into complete uncertainty, confronting environments more challenging than anything their species has previously encountered. Human remains and artifacts from this era have also been uncovered in China and Java, though fossil evidence remains frustratingly incomplete. The emerging pattern indicates multiple small groups scattered across 3 continents, each discovering unique survival methods in drastically different environments. However, these migrations weren't permanent solutions to humanity's crisis. The climate catastrophe driving humans from Africa possessed global scope and devastated everywhere simultaneously. Identical glacial advances transforming Africa into uninhabitable desert were also burying northern Europe beneath massive ice sheets. Monsoon failures drying African lakes and rivers were simultaneously converting Asian grasslands into frozen steppes. Humans courageously fleeing their ancestral homeland frequently discovered themselves leaping from one crisis directly into another, equally severe situation. Many pioneering populations likely became completely extinct, leaving behind no descendants and only faintest archaeological traces of their brief existence. Others may have survived in what scientists term refugia niche, special pockets where local conditions remained favorable even as surrounding regions became uninhabitable. River valleys with dependable water sources, coastal areas with marine resources, and volcanic regions with natural hot springs might have provided crucial microenvironments where small groups could persist even as broader landscapes became frozen wastelands. These refuge areas would have resembled tiny habitability islands in hostile territory oceans. Archaeological records from this period remain so sparse and incomplete that each new discovery potentially dramatically reshapes our understanding of where humans managed to survive and how they moved across landscapes. Every bone fragment, every stone tool, every ancient fire trace becomes precious windows into this critical human survival chapter. Yet genetic evidence reveals something remarkable occurred during this seemingly hopeless period. Deep within every cell nucleus in your body right now lies direct evidence from this ancient catastrophe. It's called chromosome 2, and it holds secrets connecting you directly to those desperate survivors. Here's something absolutely mind-blowing. Humans possess 23 chromosome pairs, while all other great apes have 24 pairs. This difference puzzled geneticists for decades, until they made an incredible discovery. Human chromosome 2 actually represents two ancestral ape chromosomes that somehow fused together at some point in our evolutionary history. The fusion point remains clearly visible in our DNA today, marked by telomere sequences, normally found only at chromosome ends, but in this case located right in the middle, where two ancient chromosomes join together. It resembles finding seams where fabric pieces were sewn together, preserved for hundreds of thousands of years. Chromosomal fusion timing has been debated for years, but the genetic bottleneck provides absolutely compelling context for when and how this could have occurred. When populations are large and genetically diverse, new chromosomal arrangements rarely spread through entire species. The fusion might appear in one individual and pass to some offspring, but would likely remain at low frequency or disappear entirely over time. However, in a population of just 1,280 breeding individuals, genetics rules work very differently. Genetic drift becomes incredibly powerful. A chromosomal change appearing in one individual suddenly has reasonable chances of spreading through the entire population simply because the population is so small. The research team discovering the bottleneck noted this connection explicitly, suggesting chromosomal fusion might have first appeared during the bottleneck period. Because the population was so tiny, it eventually became fixed, meaning it became present in every single human survivor. Today, whether you're from Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, or the Americas, you carry this fused chromosome in every body cell. It's a molecular fossil of the bottleneck, undeniable proof that every human alive today descended from that same impossibly small group of survivors who refused to let our species die out. But chromosome 2 represents just the most obvious genetic signature left by this ancient crisis. The bottleneck carved other marks throughout our entire genome that scientists are only beginning to understand. Genetic diversity in humans remains remarkably low compared to other great apes, which initially seemed paradoxical. Chimpanzees, despite numbering only in hundreds of thousands today, possess significantly greater genetic diversity than humans do. Bonobos, with perhaps 20,000 individuals remaining wild, show more genetic variation than our species of 8 billion people. This seemed impossible until scientists realized what the bottleneck had accomplished to us. The extreme population crash eliminated most ancestral genetic variation, creating a genetic legacy we still carry today. We're all much more closely related to each other than we have any right to be given our current population size. The bottleneck essentially reset humanity's genetic clock, forcing us all through the same narrow genetic gateway. Approximately 813,000 years ago, something remarkable began happening. Human numbers started demographic recovery that would transform our species forever. From just 1,280 breeding individuals, the population began growing at unprecedented rates, increasing 20-fold within just a few thousand years. After 117,000 years of hovering at extinction's absolute edge, humanity suddenly began thriving again in ways never seen before. From those desperately small numbers, the population grew to approximately 30,000 individuals, marking the beginning of our species' journey toward global dominance. But what triggered this dramatic reversal? What changed so fundamentally that humans went from barely surviving to rapidly expanding across multiple continents? The answer appears to lie in a combination of climate improvement and a technological revolution that would transform everything about how humans lived and survived. This extraordinary recovery period would witness the emergence of controlled fire usage, sophisticated tool-making techniques, and coordinated hunting strategies that finally gave humans decisive advantages over their environment and competitors. The tiny group of survivors had not merely endured mist, They had laid the foundation for humanity's eventual conquest of every habitable continent on Earth. Understanding humanity's incredible comeback requires examining one transformative discovery that altered everything about how our species could survive. While climate began stabilizing slightly after 800,000 years ago, that alone doesn't explain the explosive population growth that followed. The genuine game changer was something appearing almost mundane today, but representing a quantum leap for our ancestors. Controlled, reliable, life-preserving fire. At archaeological sites like Kozum Cave in Israel, scientists have uncovered definitive proof that humans had finally mastered this crucial technology around 790,000 years ago. This wasn't merely about accidentally discovering flames from lightning strikes or volcanic activity. This involved creating fire when needed, maintaining it over extended periods, and using it strategically for survival. The evidence proves remarkable. Researchers found traces of sustained burning, clear signs of constructed hearths, and controlled spaces where fires were repeatedly built and carefully maintained. Charred wood fragments, burnt flint tools, and thermally altered sediments all point to one incredible conclusion. These humans could now create fire on demand, keep it burning throughout nights, and employ it for multiple life-saving purposes. Fire mastery's impact cannot be overstated. It resembled suddenly acquiring superpowers that transformed every aspect of human existence. Cooking became possible for the first time, and this single change revolutionized human nutrition in ways almost impossible to comprehend. Raw meat, which had been dangerous and provided limited calories, could now be thoroughly cooked, eliminating deadly parasites and bacteria while dramatically increasing energy. Humans could extract from their food. Plant foods that had been completely embeddable or even toxic suddenly became dietary staples when properly prepared over flames. Benefits extended far beyond making food safer and more nutritious. Cooking essentially acted as external predigestion, breaking down tough fibers and complex proteins before they entered the human digestive system. This meant the human gut could begin shrinking over evolutionary time, while brains could grow larger as less energy was needed for digestion, and more could be devoted to powering increasingly complex neural networks. Fire provided warmth that extended the range of environments humans could inhabit dramatically. No longer were they confined to tropical and subtropical regions where their hairless bodies could survive elements. They could now endure winters in temperate zones, venture into mountainous regions, cross frozen steppes, and explore forests that had previously been too cold for species evolved in warm African climates. Archaeological evidence shows that after 800,000 years ago, humans began occupying significantly higher latitudes and altitudes, territories that would have been absolutely uninhabitable without protection and warmth that controlled fire provided. Perhaps equally transformative, fire completely changed relationships between humans and dangerous night hours. For hundreds of thousands of years, darkness had been terror time, when massive predators stalked human camps and families huddled together helplessly until dawn. Now flames could keep even largest and most aggressive predators at bay. Night transformed from periods of fear and vulnerability into opportunities for extended social interaction. Groups could gather around hearths long after sunset, sharing experiences, planning future hunts, teaching essential skills to younger members, and developing complex social bonds that would become hallmarks of human civilization. Some anthropologists argue convincingly that controlled fire was absolutely crucial for developing language and sophisticated culture. Extended face-to-face time around evening fires provided exactly the social context necessary for complex communication skills to evolve and flourish. Fire also revolutionized hunting and food gathering in ways giving humans unprecedented advantages over other species. Landscapes could be deliberately burned to drive game animals toward waiting hunters, clear away thick undergrowth concealing both prey and predators, and encourage useful plant growth in specific areas. Wooden spears could be hardened in flames, creating much more effective weapons even without sophisticated stone points. Torches allowed tracking wounded animals or gathering resources during low-light conditions when other predators were less active. For the first time in human history, controlled fire turned ancestors from purely reactive survivors into proactive ecosystem engineers who could actively shape their environment. The demographic explosion following this technological breakthrough was unlike anything seen before in human prehistory. Within perhaps 10,000 years, used just an evolutionary blink, human populations not only recovered from bottleneck numbers, but actually exceeded pre-crisis levels by substantial margins. Populations expanded rapidly across Africa and began spreading into Eurasia with unprecedented success. These weren't desperate refugees fleeing certain death anymore. These were confident colonizers equipped with game-changing technology, allowing them to thrive in environments their ancestors could never have imagined surviving. Genetic evidence suggests that by 700,000 years ago, humans were successfully established across the entire Old World from southern Africa's tip to northern China, from Spain's Atlantic coasts to Southeast Asia's tropical islands. The species that had nearly vanished was now dominating 3 continents. However, the bottleneck may have accomplished more than just nearly destroying humanity. Some researchers argue this extreme crisis fundamentally transformed our species in ways that shaped our entire evolutionary future. The tiny population that survived and eventually thrived represented something genuinely new in the human lineage. From this group would eventually emerge ancestors of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans. The bottleneck may have served as an evolutionary crucible, where entirely new traits were forged under the most intense selective pressure imaginable. Consider the implications. When populations are large, beneficial genetic mutations can take millions of years to spread throughout entire species. But during severe bottlenecks, any genetic variant improving survival chances can spread through whole populations in just thousands of years. Traits normally requiring countless generations to become universal could become fixed in entire human gene pools almost immediately. The research team discovering this genetic bottleneck explicitly raised this fascinating possibility, suggesting extreme natural selection during this period might have dramatically accelerated human brain evolution in ways continuing to define our species today. Any mutation enhancing cognitive abilities, improving problem-solving skills, increasing social cooperation, or boosting technological innovation would have provided enormous survival advantages during crisis periods. These beneficial traits would spread rapidly through small populations, potentially explaining some remarkable cognitive abilities distinguishing humans from other great apes. This speculation remains controversial because we cannot directly observe brains or behaviors of humans from 900,000 years ago. Fossil records from this period remain simply too incomplete to track gradual changes in brain size, structure, or function through bottleneck years. However, timing proves remarkably suggestive that based on genetic dating techniques, the last common ancestor of modern humans, Neanderthals and Denisovans, lived approximately 700,000 years ago, shortly after bottleneck crisis ended. This ancestor, whether scientists eventually classify it as Homo heidelbergensis or assign another name, appears to have been fundamentally different from earlier humans. The incredible journey from near extinction to global dominance represents one of evolution's most remarkable comeback stories, written in every cell of your body and continuing to shape human destiny today. Larger-brained, more technologically advanced, and capable of surviving in dramatically wider ranges of challenging environments than any previous human species. The bottleneck may very well have been the evolutionary crucible where these transformative new characteristics were forged under the most extreme selective pressure our lineage had ever experienced. Even if the bottleneck didn't directly cause specific evolutionary changes, it certainly created perfect conditions for rapid genetic and cultural innovation. Tiny population sizes meant beneficial mutations could spread through genetic drift much more easily than in larger populations. Intense selection pressure during crisis periods would have rapidly eliminated harmful genetic variants, while strongly favoring any traits enhancing survival. Geographic dispersal occurring during and after the bottleneck created isolated populations where different evolutionary experiments could unfold simultaneously. Modern human lineage, Neanderthal lineage, and Denisovan lineage all emerged from this post-bottleneck radiation period. Each group adapted to different environments and developed distinct survival strategies, but all carried genetic legacies of those original survivors. Archaeological evidence from post-bottleneck periods shows increasingly sophisticated tool technologies, more complex hunting strategies, and evidence of symbolic behavior, suggesting rapidly developing cognitive abilities. Sites from around 600,000 years ago reveal hand axes with remarkably symmetrical designs, suggesting not just functional toolmaking, but genuine aesthetic sensibilities. Evidence for systematic hunting of large game becomes much more common, indicating improved coordination and planning abilities. Some sites show evidence of seasonal occupation patterns, suggesting humans were developing more sophisticated understanding of environmental cycles and resource management. Most remarkably, some archaeological sites from this period contain what appear to be deliberate arrangements of stones or bones serving no obvious functional purpose. These may represent early forms of symbolic behavior. They appear perhaps ritual activities or artistic expression, hinting at complex inner lives developing in post-bottleneck humans. Genetic diversity patterns observed in modern humans also tell fascinating stories about this recovery period. While overall diversity remains low due to bottleneck effects, certain genetic regions show signs of rapid evolution and adaptation occurring precisely during demographic recovery phases. Genes related to brain development, immune system function, and dietary adaptation all show evidence of strong selective pressure during this period. This suggests humans emerging from the bottleneck weren't just more numerous than predecessors, they were genuinely more capable in fundamental biological ways. Immune system adaptations prove particularly interesting. Humans surviving the bottleneck would have been exposed to entirely new pathogens as they spread into different environments across multiple continents. Genetic evidence suggests rapid evolution of immune system genes during this period, allowing humans to adapt quickly to disease challenges they had never encountered before. Dietary adaptation genes also show signs of rapid change. As humans spread into new environments with different available food sources, their digestive systems had to adapt quickly. Genes affecting ability to digest different plant starches, process various proteins, and metabolize new fat types all evolved rapidly during post-bottleneck expansion. Perhaps most intriguingly, genes associated with brain development and function show clear signs of accelerated evolution during this period. While we cannot directly observe cognitive abilities of these ancient humans, their DNA suggests significant changes were occurring in neural architecture that would eventually produce remarkable mental capabilities of modern humans. Social implications of the recovery period were equally profound. Humans emerging from the bottleneck had survived the ultimate test of cooperation and mutual support. Small groups that couldn't work together effectively simply didn't survive the crisis. This may have selected strongly for traits like empathy, communication skills, and ability to coordinate complex group activities. Archaeological evidence from post-bottleneck sites shows increasing signs of resource sharing, coordinated hunting efforts, and what appears to be care for injured or elderly group members. The genetic legacy of this ancient cooperation may still influence human behavior today. Some researchers suggest our species' remarkable capacity for large-scale cooperation, tendency to form complex social hierarchies, and ability to work together on massive projects all trace back to adaptations that helped ancestors survive bottleneck crises. Recovery periods also witnessed first clear evidence of humans deliberately modifying their environments on larger scales. Controlled burning became more systematic and widespread, suggesting post-bottleneck humans were actively managing landscapes to increase productivity. Evidence of deliberate tool caching appears during this period, where groups would leave collections of stone tools at specific locations for future use. This indicates not just improved planning abilities, but also more sophisticated understanding of territory and resource management across both time and space. The expansion out of Africa following bottleneck recovery was unlike any previous human migration. These weren't desperate refugees fleeing disaster, but confident explorers equipped with superior technology and enhanced cognitive abilities. They moved into new territories systematically, establishing sustainable populations and adapting quickly to local conditions. By 500,000 years ago, human populations had not only recovered from the bottleneck, but had diversified into several distinct lineages that would eventually become separate species. Neanderthal ancestors were establishing themselves across Europe and Western Asia, developing robust physiques and cold weather adaptations that would define their lineage. Denisovan ancestors were spreading across Central and Eastern Asia, evolving their own unique adaptations to high-altitude environments and diverse ecological niches. Modern human ancestors remained primarily in Africa, but were developing cognitive and cultural innovations that would eventually allow them to spread across the entire planet. Each lineage carried the genetic signature of the bottleneck, molecules' memory of humanity's closest brush with extinction, but they also carried something else: evolutionary innovations that had been forged in that crucible of crisis and transformed what it meant to be human. The next time you examine yourself in a mirror, remember that you're observing the face of a survivor. Every feature, every capability, every thought running through your mind represents the culmination of an incredible journey that began with just over 1,000 individuals who refused to let our species disappear into prehistory's darkness. Your DNA contains molecular echoes of their struggle, their innovations, and their ultimate triumph over seemingly impossible odds. The blood flowing through your veins carries genetic legacies of the most successful recovery in human evolutionary history. A comeback story so remarkable that scientists initially couldn't believe their own data. But perhaps most remarkably, this ancient crisis didn't just create survivors, it created innovators, explorers, and dreamers whose descendants would eventually walk on the moon, split atoms, cure diseases, and contemplate the very origins of the universe itself. The story of our recovery doesn't end with merely surviving the bottleneck. It becomes even more incredible when you realize what happened next, and how descendants of those original survivors began reshaping the entire planet in ways that would have been unimaginable during those desperate early days, when humanity balanced precariously on extinction's knife edge, yet somehow found the strength to not just endure, but ultimately conquer the world. By 600,000 years ago, something extraordinary was unfolding across the old world. Humans emerging from this genetic crucible weren't merely more numerous than their predecessors, they were fundamentally different in ways that would define our entire species' trajectory for hundreds of thousands of years to come. Envision this transformation: scattered bands of desperate survivors who had barely clung to existence were now thriving populations spreading across 3 continents with confidence and purpose. Yet they weren't spreading randomly or chaotically. These post-bottleneck humans were displaying levels of planning, coordination, and technological innovation, marking a genuine evolutionary leap forward. Archaeological sites from this period reveal something that should send shivers down your spine. These humans were beginning to think and act in ways that were recognizably modern, even though they still looked quite different from us today. Tool technologies became increasingly sophisticated, with hand axes displaying almost artistic levels of symmetry and craftsmanship that went far beyond mere functionality. Here's where it becomes really mind-blowing. Genetic evidence suggests that during this recovery period, human evolution didn't just resume normal pace, it actually accelerated in ways defying everything we thought we knew about how evolution typically works. Remember, evolution is usually an incredibly slow process. Beneficial mutations might take hundreds of thousands or even millions of years to spread through large populations, but the bottleneck had created perfect conditions for rapid evolutionary change that compressed normal timescales into mere thousands of years. Any genetic variant providing even slight survival advantages could sweep through entire recovering populations with unprecedented speed. Traits enhancing brain function, improving immune responses, or increasing social cooperation would have spread like wildfire through these small but growing communities. The result was evolutionary supercharging that produced humans genuinely more capable than ancestors in almost every measurable way: larger brains, more sophisticated immune systems, enhanced digestive abilities, and crucially, dramatically improved cognitive capabilities that would lay foundations for everything, making us uniquely human today. However, the most remarkable changes weren't just biological basi, they were cultural and technological, in ways creating feedback loops of innovation and adaptation continuing today. As these enhanced humans spread across different environments, they encountered challenges demanding increasingly creative solutions. In northern regions where winter darkness lasted months, They developed more sophisticated shelter construction techniques and food preservation methods. In tropical areas with different disease pressures, they evolved cultural practices helping prevent pathogens spread through communities. Mountain environments demanded new hunting strategies and tool designs. Coastal regions opened entirely new food sources requiring innovative fishing and gathering techniques. Each environment pushed these recovering human populations to develop new skills and technologies that were then shared and refined across different groups. Archaeological records from sites across Europe, Asia, and Africa show increasing evidence of long-distance trade and communication networks during this period. Obsidian tools found hundreds of miles from volcanic sources, seashells discovered in inland sites far from any coast, distinctive tool styles spreading across vast geographical regions. This wasn't random material movement. This was evidence of systematic trade relationships and cultural exchange networks connecting human populations across thousands of miles. These post-bottleneck humans were developing social and organizational skills that would eventually enable complex civilizations. But perhaps most remarkably, they were beginning to engage in behaviors serving no obvious survival purpose, but suggesting rich inner lives and symbolic thinking. Deliberate burial of the dead with grave goods, careful arrangement of stones in patterns seeming to have ritual or artistic significance. The earliest tentative evidence of what might be decorative objects or personal ornaments. These behaviors hint at development of complex belief systems, aesthetic sensibilities, and symbolic communication that would eventually evolve into art, religion, and literature. Humans recovering from the bottleneck weren't just rebuilding population numbers, they were laying cognitive and cultural foundations for everything that would eventually define human civilization. Genetic evidence from this period tells equally fascinating stories about how these enhanced capabilities were spreading through human populations. Certain genetic regions associated with brain development show clear signatures of strong positive selection, meaning they were actively favored by natural selection and spread rapidly through human groups. Genes affecting language development, spatial reasoning, social cognition, and memory formation all evolved during this crucial period. While we can't directly observe cognitive abilities of these ancient humans, their DNA suggests fundamental changes were occurring in neural architecture that would eventually produce remarkable mental capabilities we associate with modern humans. Immune system genes tell particularly compelling stories. As humans spread into new environments across multiple continents, they encountered entirely novel disease challenges their ancestors had never faced: malaria in tropical regions, new bacterial infections in different climates, parasites adapted to local animal populations. Genetic evidence shows rapid evolution of immune system genes during this expansion period, allowing humans to adapt quickly to disease pressures never encountered before. This biological flexibility would prove crucial for continued success of human populations in diverse environments worldwide. Dietary adaptation genes also underwent rapid changes as humans encountered new food sources in different regions. Ability to digest various plant starches, process different protein types, and metabolize new fat categories all evolved quickly as human populations adapted to local food webs. But the most intriguing genetic changes involve regions associated with social behavior and cooperation. Genes affecting empathy, communication abilities, and capacity for large-scale group coordination all show evidence of positive selection during post-bottleneck periods. This makes perfect evolutionary sense. Humans who survived the bottleneck had demonstrated that small groups working together effectively could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. As populations grew and social groups became larger and more complex, ability to maintain cooperation and coordinate activities across bigger communities became increasingly important. Archaeological evidence supports this genetic narrative. The sites from recovery periods show increasing evidence of resource sharing, coordinated hunting efforts, and what appears to be systematic care for injured, elderly, or disabled group members. The transformation from near extinction to global dominance represents one of evolution's most remarkable success stories. Those desperate survivors didn't just rebuild bubbles, they revolutionized what it meant to be human. They developed technologies, social structures, and cognitive abilities that would eventually enable their descendants to create art, build civilizations, explore space, and unlock the secrets of life itself. Every time you solve a complex problem, cooperate in a large group, create something beautiful, or contemplate your place in the universe, you're utilizing capabilities that were forged in that ancient crucible of crisis and recovery. The bottleneck didn't just nearly destroy humanity, it created the foundation for everything remarkable about our species today. Your existence represents the culmination of the most incredible comeback story in evolutionary history, written in your DNA and continuing to unfold with every breath you take. What if I told you that every single achievement in human history, from building pyramids to landing on the moon, exists because our ancestors almost went extinct? Not just almost, we came so close to disappearing forever that scientists estimate only a few thousand humans remained on the entire planet. But here's what will blow your mind. This near-extinction event didn't just save humanity, it completely rewrote what it meant to be human. The survivors didn't just bounce back from this catastrophe. They emerged as something entirely different, more intelligent, more cooperative, more innovative than any humans who had ever existed before. And the proof of this incredible transformation is written in your DNA right now. After this devastating population collapse, something extraordinary began happening. The remaining humans started displaying behaviors that had never been seen in our species before. They weren't just making simple tools anymore. They were engineering complex implements that required multiple manufacturing stages and specialized expertise to create properly. Archaeological evidence shows they began establishing tool storage sites, deliberately caching collections of equipment for future expeditions. This wasn't random behavior. This was systematic planning on a scale that earlier humans had never demonstrated. But the innovations went far beyond toolmaking. These survivors started managing entire landscapes through controlled fire techniques and strategic harvesting methods. They were actively reshaping their environments to boost productivity, rather than simply adapting to whatever nature provided. This represents a fundamental shift in human thinking, from reactive survival to proactive environmental management. What researchers find most fascinating is how these behaviors indicate the development of cognitive abilities that modern scientists associate with advanced abstract reasoning and sophisticated problem-solving capabilities. These weren't gradual improvements. Its archaeological evidence suggests these mental leaps happened remarkably quickly after the population bottleneck ended. By 400,000 years ago, the descendants of these bottleneck survivors had branched into several distinct human lineages, each developing unique characteristics that would define different species. The ancestral Neanderthals were establishing dominance across Europe and Western Asia, evolving the powerful builds and cold weather adaptations that would allow them to thrive in brutal Ice Age conditions that would challenge modern humans even with our advanced technology. Meanwhile, the ancestral Denisovans were expanding throughout Central and Eastern Asia, developing remarkable genetic modifications for high-altitude survival and creating their own distinctive technological traditions and cultural systems. The ancestors of modern humans remained concentrated in Africa, but were developing the cognitive and cultural breakthroughs that would eventually enable global colonization and environmental dominance across every habitat on Earth. Each lineage carried the genetic fingerprint of that ancient bottleneck, yet they were simultaneously developing their own specialized adaptations and innovations. The Neanderthal branch would eventually produce humans capable of surviving in environments so hostile that modern humans require sophisticated equipment just for brief visits. The Denisovan branch would develop genetic modifications, allowing them to function effectively at altitudes where contemporary humans experience significant physiological stress. The modern human branch would ultimately develop the cultural and technological innovations, enabling worldwide expansion and the construction of complex civilizations. However, all three lineages shared fundamental capabilities that had been forged during the bottleneck crisis and refined throughout the recovery phase: enhanced cognitive abilities, sophisticated social cooperation systems, advanced tool-making skills, and the capacity for rapid cultural and technological innovation. These shared characteristics strongly suggest that the bottleneck had created something genuinely revolutionary in human evolutionary development. The expansion patterns of post-bottleneck humans reveal remarkable evidence of their enhanced capabilities. Unlike earlier human migrations that followed relatively straightforward routes along coastlines or river systems, the post-bottleneck expansion demonstrated systematic and purposeful characteristics, suggesting advanced planning and coordination abilities. Humans were deliberately exploring and colonizing new territories, establishing sustainable communities, and maintaining extensive communication and trade networks across vast distances. They were actively managing local resources through controlled burning practices, selective hunting strategies, and systematic gathering techniques. They were developing specialized tools and methods adapted to specific local environments while maintaining broader cultural connections across enormous geographical regions. By 300,000 years ago, archaeological sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia demonstrate evidence of increasingly sophisticated human communities featuring complex tool technologies, systematic resource management practices, and clear indicators of symbolic behavior and artistic expression. These communities weren't merely surviving in their environments, they were actively transforming them in ways that increased productivity and sustainability. They were developing the technological and cultural innovations that would eventually lead to agriculture, permanent settlements, and complex civilizations. The genetic legacy of bottleneck survivors was spreading across the ancient world, while continuing to evolve and adapt as human populations encountered new challenges and opportunities. The recovery that had begun 800,000 years ago had transformed into a genuine evolutionary renaissance, producing increasingly capable and innovative human communities. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this recovery story is how it demonstrates the incredible resilience and adaptability that defines our species. The humans who survived the bottleneck didn't simply endure the crisis and return to their previous lifestyle. They utilized the experience as a launching point for innovations and capabilities that fundamentally transformed the meaning of human existence. The descendants of those original survivors weren't satisfied with mere survival. They explored, innovated, adapted, and thrived in ways that would have been inconceivable to their ancestors, who had struggled desperately just to survive daily existence. When you observe the remarkable diversity of human cultures, languages, technologies, and achievements distributed across every continent on Earth today, you're witnessing the ultimate legacy of that ancient recovery. Every human accomplishment, technological breakthrough, artistic creation, literary work, musical composition, and act of compassion or cooperation or creative problem-solving traces its origins to the innovations and capabilities forged during humanity's darkest period. The next time you witness humans collaborating to solve complex challenges, creating beautiful art, exploring dangerous frontiers, or caring for those in need, remember that you're observing behaviors and capabilities shaped by an ancient crisis that nearly destroyed our entire species. We exist because a tiny group of ancestors refused surrender when extinction seemed inevitable. More importantly, we thrive because they transformed that crisis into an opportunity to become something greater than they had ever been before. The genetic memory of their struggle, innovations, and ultimate triumph flows through every human being alive today, connecting all 8 billion of us to that remarkable story of survival and transformation that began nearly 1 million years ago. But the story becomes even more incredible when you realize this ancient recovery wasn't just about population numbers, it was about fundamental changes in what it meant to be human that continue shaping our species today. The evidence hidden in our DNA tells a tale so remarkable that it challenges everything we thought we knew about human evolution. When scientists first started piecing together the genetic timeline of this recovery, they expected to find gradual, steady growth as populations slowly rebuilt over hundreds of thousands of years. Instead, they discovered something that defied all conventional wisdom about how evolution normally works. With approximately 1,300 breeding individuals remaining, any genetic variation that provided even the smallest survival advantage could sweep through the entire human population at unprecedented velocity. It was like operating a genetic lottery where the winning numbers could actually triumph. The outcome was what researchers now term an evolutionary acceleration phenomenon. Genes controlling brain development, immune system functionality, social cooperation mechanisms, and technological innovation all underwent rapid transformations during this recovery phase. The humans emerging from this crisis weren't simply more numerous than their predecessors mime. They were genuinely more capable in virtually every aspect that matters for survival and success. Brain development genes demonstrate particularly dramatic alterations during this time frame. While we cannot directly observe the cognitive abilities of these ancient humans, their DNA reveals a story of rapid neural evolution that established the foundation for everything we consider uniquely human today. Enhanced memory formation capabilities, improved spatial reasoning skills, superior social cognition abilities, and crucially, the capacity for complex language development. But here's where it becomes absolutely mind-blowing. The genetic evidence suggests that some of our most distinctive human traits, characteristics we consider fundamental to our identity as a species, may have emerged directly from this ancient crisis. Our extraordinary capacity for cooperation, our ability to strategize for future scenarios, our talent for technological innovation, even our tendency toward artistic expression, all display genetic signatures tracing back to this recovery period. The immune system transformations are equally remarkable. As these enhanced humans dispersed across different continents, they encountered disease challenges their ancestors had never confronted: malaria in tropical regions, bacterial infections adapted to various climates, parasites from local animal populations. The genetic record demonstrates that human immune systems evolved at breakneck velocity to handle these new threats. This biological flexibility provided post-bottleneck humans with a massive advantage over other species. While most animals remain locked into specific environments by their genetic limitations, humans were developing the ability to adapt rapidly to virtually any habitat on Earth. It's one of the key reasons we eventually became the most successful large mammal species in planetary history. The social implications of these genetic changes were equally profound. Genes affecting empathy, communication skills, and the ability to coordinate large group activities all underwent positive selection. During this period, the humans who survived the bottleneck had demonstrated that small groups working together effectively could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. As populations expanded and social groups became larger and more complex, the ability to maintain cooperation and coordinate activities across bigger communities became increasingly crucial. The genetic changes from this period provided humans with the biological foundation for the complex societies that would eventually develop into civilizations. Archaeological evidence from recovery period sites reveals increasingly sophisticated behaviors that support this genetic narrative. Evidence of systematic resource sharing, coordinated hunting expeditions, and what appears to be deliberate care for injured or elderly group members. These aren't merely survival behaviors, they're the foundation stones of human civilization. Tool technologies from this era reveal planning and coordination abilities that were revolutionary for their time. Complex implements requiring multiple manufacturing steps and specialized knowledge to use effectively. Tool caching sites, where groups deliberately stored collections of implements for future use. Evidence of systematic landscape management through controlled burning and selective resource harvesting. These innovations suggest that post-bottleneck humans were developing enhanced abilities to think abstractly, plan for future scenarios, and coordinate group activities across both time and space. Modern cognitive researchers associate these capabilities with advanced problem-solving skills and complex symbolic thinking. By 400,000 years ago, the descendants of those original survivors had diversified into several distinct human lineages that would eventually become separate species, but they all shared certain fundamental capabilities that had been forged during the bottleneck crisis and refined during the recovery period. The ancestors of Neanderthals were establishing themselves across Europe and Western Asia, developing the robust physiques and cold weather adaptations that would allow them to thrive in Ice Age environments that would eliminate most other species. Their genetic toolkit included enhanced capabilities for surviving in extreme cold, processing high-protein diets, and coordinating complex group hunts of massive Ice Age mammals. The ancestors of Denisovans were spreading across Central and Eastern Asia, evolving unique genetic adaptations to high-altitude environments, and developing distinctive tool technologies. Their genetic legacy includes adaptations that allow modern Tibetans and other high-altitude populations to thrive in environments where most humans struggle to function effectively. The ancestors of modern humans remained primarily in Africa, but were developing the cognitive and cultural innovations that would eventually enable global colonization and the development of complex civilizations. The genetic toolkit emphasized flexibility, adaptability, and the capacity for rapid cultural and technological innovation. Each lineage carried the molecular memory of that ancient bottleneck, but they were also developing their own unique specializations. It's like watching a single species split into multiple experimental versions, each testing different strategies for long-term survival and success. But here's the truly remarkable aspect. The expansion patterns of post-bottleneck humans reveal something extraordinary about their enhanced capabilities. Unlike earlier human migrations that seem to follow simple patterns along coastlines or river valleys, the post-bottleneck expansion was systematic and purposeful in ways that suggest advanced planning abilities. These humans weren't simply wandering randomly into new territories, hoping for optimal outcomes. They were deliberately exploring and colonizing new environments, establishing sustainable populations and maintaining long-distance communication and trade networks that connected communities across thousands of miles. Archaeological evidence shows obsidian tools found hundreds of miles from their volcanic sources, seashells discovered in inland sites far from any ocean, distinctive tool styles and cultural practices spreading across vast geographical regions through systematic exchange networks. This wasn't accidental cultural diffusion. This was evidence of organized trade relationships and communication systems that connected human populations across continental distances. These post-bottleneck humans were developing the social and organizational skills that would eventually enable complex civilizations. By 300,000 years ago, archaeological sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia show evidence of increasingly sophisticated human communities with complex tool technologies, systematic resource management practices, and clear evidence of symbolic behavior and artistic expression. But perhaps most remarkably, they were beginning to engage in behaviors that served no obvious survival purpose, but suggested rich inner lives and symbolic thinking capabilities that would eventually flower into the full spectrum of human cultural achievement we see today. What happens next will completely transform how you think about human consciousness and civilization. These recovering humans weren't just surviving anymore, they were creating something that had never existed on Earth before. Deliberate burial of the deceased with carefully positioned grave offerings. Intentional arrangement of stones in patterns that seem to hold ritual or artistic significance. The earliest evidence of what might be decorative objects or personal ornaments. These behaviors hint at the development of complex belief systems, aesthetic sensibilities, and symbolic communication that would eventually evolve into art, religion, philosophy, and literature. The humans recovering from the bottleneck weren't simply rebuilding their population numbers, they were establishing the cognitive and cultural foundations for everything that would eventually define human civilization. The genetic evidence reveals something even more remarkable about this time frame. Specific genetic regions associated with creativity and innovation demonstrate clear signatures of positive selection during the recovery phase. Genes affecting artistic ability, musical talent, and creative problem-solving all underwent evolutionary changes that enhanced these distinctively human capabilities. This suggests that the crisis didn't just produce survivors, it produced innovators, artists, and visionaries whose enhanced creative abilities provided them crucial advantages in adapting to new environments and solving complex survival challenges. The capacity for innovation became a survival trait that was actively favored by natural selection. The social structures developing during this period were equally revolutionary. Evidence suggests that post-bottleneck human groups were developing increasingly complex hierarchies, specialized roles, and cooperative decision-making processes that allowed them to coordinate activities across larger and more diverse communities. These weren't simply bigger versions of earlier human groups. They were qualitatively different social organizations that could undertake projects requiring sustained cooperation across multiple generations. The construction of complex shelters, the development of sophisticated hunting strategies, the maintenance of long-distance trade networks, all required social innovations that had never existed before in human history. The technological innovations from this period are equally impressive. Evidence of systematic fire management, including the controlled burning of landscapes to encourage useful plant growth and concentrate game animals, advanced tool-making techniques that produced implements of unprecedented sophistication and durability. Most remarkably, evidence of what appears to be the earliest forms of symbolic storage of information, patterns carved into bones or stones that seem to represent numerical information, hunting records, or territorial markers. These may represent the very earliest forms of writing, the beginning of humanity's ability to store and transmit complex information across time and space. By 200,000 years ago, the genetic and archaeological evidence shows that the descendants of those original bottleneck survivors had developed capabilities that were recognizably modern in their sophistication and complexity. They were using advanced tools, creating art, engaging in long-distance trade, managing complex social relationships, and systematically modifying their environments to increase productivity. But they were also beginning to ask the kinds of questions that would eventually lead to science, philosophy, and religion. Archaeological sites from this period contain evidence of what appears to be ritual behavior, suggesting that these humans were grappling with abstract concepts like mortality, meaning, and purpose. The capacity for abstract thought, symbolic reasoning, and creative expression that emerged during the recovery period would eventually enable humans to develop mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and all the other intellectual achievements that define our species today. The genetic legacy of those ancient survivors flows through every human being alive today, but it's been continuously refined and enhanced through hundreds of thousands of years of additional evolution and cultural development. The basic toolkit of enhanced cognitive abilities, social cooperation, and innovative problem-solving that emerged from the bottleneck has been built upon and expanded in countless ways. Modern humans can trace specific genetic variants back to this ancient recovery period, variants that affect everything from our ability to learn languages, to our capacity for mathematical reasoning, to our talent for artistic expression. The molecular echoes of that ancient transformation continue to influence human behavior and capabilities today, but perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this entire story is what it tells us about human resilience and adaptability. The species that nearly went extinct 900,000 years ago didn't just bounce back. It used that crisis as a launching point for innovations and capabilities that fundamentally transformed the trajectory of life on Earth. The humans who survived the bottleneck could never have imagined that their descendants would eventually walk on the moon, split the atom, cure diseases, compose symphonies, write novels, or contemplate the origins of the universe itself. But the genetic and cultural foundations they established during their darkest hour made all of these achievements possible. Today, when we face global challenges that seem insurmountable, when we worry about climate change, pandemics, or technological disruption threatening our way of life, we can remember that our species has already survived the ultimate test. We've faced extinction and not only survived, but transformed that crisis into an opportunity for unprecedented growth and innovation. The next time you witness human beings working together to solve complex problems, creating beautiful art, exploring dangerous frontiers, caring for those in need, or pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge, remember that you're observing capabilities that were forged during humanity's greatest crisis nearly 1,000,000 years ago. Every act of creativity, every moment of cooperation, every breakthrough in understanding, every expression of compassion connects us directly to those ancient survivors who refused to let our species disappear into the darkness of prehistory. Their legacy lives on not just in our DNA, but in every human achievement that makes life richer, safer, more meaningful, or more beautiful. The story of our recovery from the brink of extinction isn't just ancient history, it's the foundation story of everything that makes us human today. And as we continue to face new challenges and explore new frontiers, we carry with us the genetic memory of ancestors who proved that humans can overcome seemingly impossible odds and emerge stronger than ever before. We exist because they survived, but more than that, we thrive because they transformed survival into an opportunity for unprecedented innovation and growth. That's the real legacy of the bottleneck. Not just the fact that we survived, but the remarkable ways in which survival made us more capable, more creative, and more connected than our species had ever been before. The genetic echoes of that ancient transformation continue to shape human potential today, reminding us that even our darkest challenges can become the foundation for our greatest achievements. 8 billion human lives trace back to those 1,300 survivors who refused to be the last and who instead became the first of something extraordinary and new. But the transformation didn't stop there. As these enhanced humans continued to spread across the globe, something even more remarkable began happening. They weren't just adapting to new environments anymore, they were actively reshaping those environments in ways that would benefit future generations. Archaeological evidence from around 150,000 years ago reveals a quantum leap in human behavior that scientists are still trying to fully understand. These weren't just survival adaptations anymore. These were conscious decisions to invest time and energy in projects that wouldn't pay off for decades or even centuries. Think about what this means. You're living in a world where every day is a struggle for survival, where finding enough food and staying warm through the winter requires constant effort and attention. Yet somehow, these humans found the mental capacity and social organization to undertake massive long-term projects that would primarily benefit their descendants. Evidence of systematic landscape engineering appears across multiple continents during this period, controlled burning operations that were clearly planned and coordinated across vast territories, deliberate modification of water sources through primitive dam construction and channel diversion, strategic planting of useful trees and shrubs in locations that would provide resources for future generations. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about this behavior. It requires a level of abstract thinking and future planning that goes far beyond anything we see in other species. These humans had to be able to visualize future scenarios they would never personally witness, coordinate complex group activities across multiple generations, and maintain cultural knowledge systems that could preserve and transmit detailed information over centuries. The genetic evidence suggests that this capacity for long-term thinking and strategic planning underwent rapid evolution during the post-bottleneck period. Specific genetic variants associated with executive function, working memory, and abstract reasoning all demonstrate signatures of strong positive selection during this crucial phase of human development. What's emerging from the latest research is a picture of post-bottleneck humans who weren't just more numerous or better equipped than their ancestors. They were operating with fundamentally different cognitive architectures that enabled entirely new categories of thought and behavior. The social implications were staggering. Groups that had once consisted of maybe 20 or 30 individuals struggling to survive day to day were now organizing into complex networks of hundreds or even thousands of people working together on coordinated projects spanning decades. Archaeological sites from this period demonstrate evidence of sophisticated resource-sharing systems, specialized craft production, and what appears to be early forms of social stratification based on skill and knowledge rather than just physical dominance. These weren't primitive bands of hunter-gatherers anymore. These were the foundations of complex societies. The technological innovations were equally revolutionary. Stone tool technologies reached levels of sophistication that wouldn't be surpassed for hundreds of thousands of years. Composite tools made from multiple materials assembled with precise techniques, specialized implements designed for specific tasks and environments, tool production systems that required coordinated group effort and sophisticated knowledge management. But perhaps most remarkably, evidence begins appearing of what can only be described as early forms of engineering. Systematic construction of shelters using advanced techniques for maximizing insulation and structural integrity. Sophisticated food storage and processing facilities that could preserve resources through seasonal cycles. Water management systems that could sustain larger populations in challenging environments. These innovations required not just technical knowledge, but also mathematical understanding, engineering principles, and project management capabilities that we typically associate with much more recent human societies. Yet the archaeological evidence clearly shows that these capabilities were developing among the descendants of bottleneck survivors over 100,000 years ago. The artistic and symbolic achievements from this period are equally impressive. Cave paintings and rock art begin appearing across multiple continents, showing not just aesthetic sensibilities, but also sophisticated understanding of color, composition, and symbolic representation. Personal ornaments become more elaborate and culturally specific, suggesting the development of complex identity systems and social signaling mechanisms. Evidence of what appears to be early forms of music and dance emerges from archaeological sites during this period. Bone flutes and percussion instruments that demonstrate understanding of acoustic principles and harmonic relationships. deliberately created performance spaces that suggest organized cultural events and community gatherings centered around artistic expression. But the most remarkable development during this period was the emergence of what scientists now recognize as proto-writing systems, patterns carved into bones, stones, and cave walls that clearly represent systematic information storage rather than random decoration or simple artistic expression. These early symbolic systems show evidence of grammatical structure, systematic representation of numerical concepts, and what appears to be calendrical information tracking, seasonal cycles, and astronomical events. While not yet true writing in the sense we understand it today, these systems represent crucial steps toward the information storage and transmission capabilities that would eventually enable complex civilizations. The genetic evidence from this period tells an equally fascinating story about the continued evolution of human cognitive capabilities. Brain development genes show ongoing positive selection for variants associated with language processing, mathematical reasoning, and creative problem solving. The human brain was literally still evolving to become more capable of handling the increasingly complex cognitive demands of post-bottleneck society. Immune system genes also continued evolving rapidly as human populations expanded into new environments and developed closer relationships with domesticated animals and managed landscapes. The genetic toolkit that had enabled survival during the bottleneck was being continuously refined and enhanced to handle new challenges and opportunities. By 100,000 years ago, the descendants of those original survivors had developed capabilities that were recognizably modern in their sophistication. They were creating art, engaging in long-distance trade, using advanced technologies, managing complex social relationships, and systematically modifying their environments to increase productivity and sustainability. But they were also grappling with abstract concepts and existential questions that would eventually lead to philosophy, religion, and science. Archaeological evidence suggests the development of burial practices that indicate belief in afterlife concepts, ritual behaviors that suggest spiritual or religious thinking, and symbolic systems that demonstrate abstract reasoning about concepts like time, space, and causality. The capacity for abstract thought and symbolic reasoning that had emerged during the recovery period was now enabling humans to contemplate not just practical survival challenges, but fundamental questions about existence, meaning, and purpose. This represents a cognitive revolution that would eventually enable humans to develop mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and all the other intellectual achievements that define our species. The social structures that emerged during this period were equally revolutionary. Evidence suggests that human communities were developing increasingly sophisticated systems of governance, conflict resolution, and resource allocation that could maintain cooperation and coordination across much larger and more diverse populations. These weren't just bigger versions of earlier human groups. They were qualitatively different social organizations with specialized roles, complex hierarchies, and institutional structures that could preserve and transmit cultural knowledge across generations. The foundations of human civilization were being laid by the enhanced descendants of bottleneck survivors. The expansion patterns during this period reveal something extraordinary about human adaptability and ambition. Rather than simply occupying new territories as they became available, these humans were actively exploring and colonizing environments that presented unprecedented challenges and opportunities. Evidence shows human populations successfully establishing themselves in extreme environments that had never been occupied by any human species before. High-altitude regions where oxygen levels challenged basic physiology, Arctic environments where winter darkness and extreme cold demanded entirely new survival strategies, desert regions where water scarcity required innovative resource management techniques. Each of these colonization efforts represented not just individual acts of courage and determination, but coordinated group endeavors that required advanced planning, sophisticated technology, and complex social organization. These humans weren't just adapting to new environments, they were systematically conquering every habitable niche on the planet. The genetic diversity patterns from this period reveal something remarkable about how these expanding populations maintained their enhanced capabilities, while also developing local adaptations. Rather than losing the cognitive and social innovations that had emerged during the recovery period, human populations were finding ways to preserve and enhance these capabilities while also developing specialized traits suited to their new environments. This represents the final phase of humanity's transformation from a species that nearly went extinct to the most successful and adaptable large mammal in Earth's history. The genetic memory of that ancient bottleneck, the innovations forged during the recovery period, and the continued evolution of human capabilities created a species unlike anything that had ever existed on our planet. Today, every human achievement from the International Space Station to the Internet, from medical breakthroughs to artistic masterpieces, can trace its origins back to the enhanced cognitive and social capabilities that emerged during humanity's recovery from near extinction nearly 1 million years ago. We are all living proof that sometimes the greatest challenges can become the foundation for the most extraordinary achievements. Rather than fragmenting into isolated groups that lost their technological and cultural advantages, human populations maintained extensive networks of communication and exchange that preserved and spread innovations across vast geographical distances. This represents a crucial breakthrough in human social organization. For the first time in evolutionary history, a species was able to expand across diverse environments while maintaining and even enhancing its technological and cultural capabilities, rather than losing them to geographical isolation. The result was an unprecedented acceleration of human innovation and adaptation. New technologies and techniques developed in one region could spread rapidly across entire continents. Cultural innovations and social organizational improvements could be tested, refined, and adopted by communities thousands of miles away. Scientific and artistic discoveries could build upon previous achievements in ways that created exponential rather than linear progress. By 70,000 years ago, this network effect had produced human communities with capabilities that would have seemed magical to their bottleneck ancestors. Advanced tool technologies that could efficiently exploit virtually any environment on Earth, sophisticated social organizations that could coordinate complex projects across multiple generations, cultural and symbolic systems that could preserve and transmit vast amounts of information across time and space. But perhaps most remarkably, these communities had developed the cognitive and cultural foundations that would eventually enable the greatest expansion in human history, the colonization of Australia, the Americas, and eventually every habitable environment on the planet, the development of agriculture, permanent settlements, and complex civilizations, the emergence of writing, mathematics, science, and all the other intellectual achievements that define modern humanity. The genetic legacy of the bottleneck survivors was spreading across the globe, but it was also continuing to evolve and adapt in response to new challenges and opportunities. Each new environment colonized, each new technology developed, each new social innovation created selection pressures that further enhanced human capabilities. Modern genetic analysis reveals that many of the traits we consider most distinctively human underwent their final evolutionary refinements during this period of global expansion. Enhanced cognitive abilities, sophisticated social cooperation, advanced technological innovation, and creative problem-solving all show genetic signatures, indicating continued positive selection well after the initial bottleneck recovery. The humans who emerged from this process weren't just the ancestors of modern people, they were the creators of the cognitive, cultural, and technological toolkit that would eventually enable every human achievement, from the construction of the pyramids to the exploration of space. Today, when we look at the remarkable diversity of human cultures, languages, technologies, and achievements spread across every continent on Earth, we're seeing the ultimate expression of capabilities that were first forged in the crucible of that ancient bottleneck and then continuously refined through hundreds of thousands of years of innovation and adaptation. Every human language traces its origins to communication systems developed by bottleneck descendants. Every mathematical concept builds upon abstract reasoning capabilities that emerged during the recovery period. Every work of art reflects aesthetic sensibilities that first appeared in post-bottleneck communities. Every scientific discovery employs investigative techniques that evolved from survival strategies developed by ancient survivors. The next time you witness human beings collaborating to solve complex problems, creating beautiful art, exploring dangerous frontiers, or caring for those in need, remember that you're observing the culmination of the greatest comeback story in evolutionary history, behaviors and capabilities that were shaped by an ancient crisis that nearly destroyed our entire species, then transformed into the foundation for unprecedented innovation and achievement. We exist because 1,300 individuals refused to be the last. We thrive because their descendants transformed survival into an opportunity for continuous enhancement and growth. We achieve because every generation has built upon the cognitive and cultural legacy left by those who came before. The genetic memory of that ancient transformation continues to influence human potential today, reminding us that our greatest challenges can become the foundation for our most remarkable achievements. 8 billion human lives, trace back to those original survivors, carrying within our DNA the molecular evidence of humanity's most crucial test and greatest triumph. But the story doesn't end with just surviving or even thriving. The real legacy of the bottleneck is what it reveals about the unlimited potential that emerges when human beings refuse to accept limitations and instead transform obstacles into opportunities for unprecedented growth and innovation. Every time we push the boundaries of what's possible, every time we overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges, every time we create something beautiful or meaningful or beneficial for future generations, we're continuing the journey that began with 300 individuals who looked extinction in the face and decided to become something greater instead. That's the true power of the human spirit, forged in the crucible of our species' darkest hour and continuously refined through every generation that followed. We are all descendants of survivors, inheritors of their courage, their innovation, and their refusal to accept defeat. And as we continue to face new challenges and explore new frontiers, we carry with us the unshakable knowledge that no obstacle is too great for human determination and creativity to overcome. The bottleneck that nearly destroyed us instead became the catalyst for everything that makes us human today. And that transformation continues in each of us, in every choice we make to build rather than destroy, to create rather than consume, to hope rather than despair. We are living proof that from the darkest crisis can emerge the brightest possibilities, and that the human capacity for growth and achievement knows no bounds. The story reaches its most incredible chapter when we realize that this ancient recovery didn't just create better survivors, it created the first true humans capable of reshaping reality itself through the power of imagination and collective action. By 50,000 years ago, something absolutely revolutionary was happening across human communities worldwide. These weren't just people adapting to their environments anymore. They were actively reimagining what those environments could become, and then making those visions reality through coordinated effort and technological innovation. Picture this transformation. Communities that had once struggled simply to find enough food to survive the winter were now undertaking massive construction projects that would serve their descendants for centuries. They were building not just for immediate needs, but for dreams and possibilities that existed only in their imagination. This is where the true miracle of human consciousness reveals itself. We became the first species in Earth's history, capable of creating realities that had never existed before, of bringing into being things that existed first as pure thought, then through determination and cooperation, became permanent features of the physical world. From those 1,300 survivors who refused to accept extinction, we inherited not just the will to survive, but the power to imagine and create futures that surpass anything that came before. Every skyscraper, every symphony, every scientific breakthrough, every act of love and compassion represents the continuation of that ancient transformation, the moment when humanity learned to turn impossible dreams into inevitable realities. Evidence from archaeological sites spanning multiple continents demonstrates systematic construction of permanent structures, sophisticated water management systems, and deliberately planned settlements that could support populations far larger than anything witnessed before in human history. But here's what makes this period so mind-blowing. These weren't random acts of construction or accidental improvements. The archaeological evidence reveals clear signs of advanced planning, Nike's architectural principles and engineering knowledge that required abstract mathematical reasoning and sophisticated understanding of physics and material science. We're discussing humans who had developed the cognitive ability to visualize complex three-dimensional structures, calculate load-bearing requirements, design drainage systems, and coordinate construction projects involving hundreds of workers over multiple years. These capabilities represent a quantum leap in human mental architecture, that enabled entirely new categories of achievement. The genetic evidence from this period unveils something extraordinary about how these enhanced cognitive abilities were spreading through human populations. Specific gene variants associated with spatial reasoning, mathematical thinking, and long-term planning demonstrate signatures of rapid positive selection across multiple continents simultaneously. This suggests that the enhanced mental capabilities weren't just developing in isolated communities, but were spreading rapidly through human populations worldwide through migration, intermarriage, and cultural exchange. The entire species was undergoing cognitive enhancement at unprecedented velocity. The social implications were staggering. Human communities were developing increasingly sophisticated systems of knowledge preservation and transmission that could maintain complex cultural information across multiple generations. Evidence demonstrates the emergence of specialized teaching roles, formal apprenticeship systems, and institutional structures dedicated to preserving and advancing technical knowledge. These weren't just bigger hunter-gatherer bands anymore. These were proto-civilizations with specialized crafts, complex trade networks, and social hierarchies based on expertise and contribution, rather than just physical dominance or family relationships. The foundations of modern society were being established by enhanced descendants of those ancient bottleneck survivors. The technological achievements from this period are absolutely breathtaking when you consider the limited resources and tools available. Evidence of sophisticated textile production, advanced metallurgy techniques, precision tool manufacturing, and what can only be described as early forms of mechanical engineering. Composite tools made from multiple materials assembled with techniques that wouldn't be improved upon for thousands of years. Specialized implements designed for specific tasks that demonstrate deep understanding of physics, material science, and ergonomic principles. Production systems that could manufacture standardized goods at scales requiring coordinated labor and quality control management. But perhaps most remarkably, evidence begins appearing of what archaeologists now recognize as early forms of scientific thinking. Systematic experimentation with different materials and techniques, careful observation and recording of natural phenomena, deliberate testing of hypotheses about how the physical world operates. Bone tools with precise measurement markings that suggest mathematical calculation systems, stone arrangements that appear to track astronomical events with remarkable accuracy, evidence of controlled experiments in agriculture, animal breeding, and resource management that demonstrate understanding of cause and effect relationships. These developments represent the emergence of scientific methodology thousands of years before we typically associate such thinking with human civilization. The enhanced cognitive abilities that had emerged from the bottleneck were enabling humans to approach problems with systematic analysis and experimental validation rather than just trial and error. The artistic achievements from this period are equally impressive and reveal something profound about the development of human consciousness and self-awareness. Cave paintings and rock art become increasingly sophisticated, showing not just technical skill but complex narrative structures, symbolic representation, and what appears to be abstract conceptual thinking. Evidence of elaborate personal ornamentation suggests the development of individual identity concepts and social status systems based on achievement and recognition, rather than just birth or physical dominance. Musical instruments become more complex and varied, indicating understanding of acoustic principles and harmonic relationships that approach mathematical precision. But the most remarkable artistic development is the emergence of what can only be described as storytelling systems, pictographic sequences that appear to represent narrative events, mythological concepts, and historical records. These aren't just decorative art anymore. These are early forms of literature, history, and philosophy, expressed through visual media. The symbolic systems developing during this period show clear evidence of grammatical structure, abstract concept representation, and what appears to be early forms of mathematical notation. While not yet true writing in the modern sense, these systems represent crucial steps toward the information storage and transmission capabilities that would eventually enable complex civilizations. Archaeological evidence suggests that human communities were beginning to grapple with existential questions that would eventually lead to organized religion, formal philosophy, and scientific inquiry. Burial practices become increasingly elaborate and suggest belief systems involving concepts of soul, afterlife, and moral responsibility. Ritual sites appear that seem designed for community gatherings focused on non-survival activities like storytelling, music, dance, and what appears to be early forms of dramatic performance. These represent the emergence of cultural activities that serve no direct survival purpose, but provide meaning, identity, and social cohesion. The capacity for abstract thought and symbolic reasoning that had been enhanced during the bottleneck recovery was now enabling humans to contemplate not just practical challenges but fundamental questions about existence, purpose, and meaning. This represents a consciousness revolution that would eventually enable humans to develop formal philosophy, organized religion, and systematic scientific inquiry. The expansion patterns during this period reveal something extraordinary about human ambition and organizational capability. Rather than simply occupying available territories, these enhanced humans were actively seeking out and conquering environments that presented unprecedented challenges and required innovative solutions. Evidence shows successful colonization of Australia by at least 50,000 years ago, requiring sophisticated boat-building technology and navigation skills that could guide travelers across hundreds of miles of open ocean to lands they had never seen. This wasn't accidental drift or lucky accident. This was purposeful exploration undertaken by people with advanced planning abilities and technological sophistication. The colonization of the Americas followed shortly after, involving even more challenging oceanic crossings or overland journeys through extreme Arctic environments. These expansion efforts represent coordinated group endeavors that required advanced planning, sophisticated technology, and complex social organization maintained across multiple generations. Each new environment colonized presented unique challenges that demanded innovative solutions. Desert survival required completely different resource management strategies than Arctic survival. High-altitude colonization demanded physiological adaptations and specialized equipment. Oceanic exploration necessitated advanced navigation techniques and seaworthy vessel construction. Yet these enhanced humans succeeded in every environment they attempted to colonize, demonstrating adaptability and problem-solving capabilities that had never existed before in any species. They weren't just surviving in these new environments, they were thriving and establishing permanent communities that would endure for thousands of years. The ultimate legacy of those 1,300 bottleneck survivors wasn't just biological survival. It was the creation of a species capable of transforming imagination into reality, of building futures that existed first as dreams, then through determination and cooperation, became permanent features of the world. From those ancient survivors who refused to accept extinction, we inherited the cognitive tools, social capabilities, and creative spirit that continue driving human achievement today. Every breakthrough, every masterpiece, every act of compassion represents the ongoing expression of capabilities forged during humanity's darkest hour and continuously refined through every generation since. We are the living proof that the greatest challenges can become catalysts for the most extraordinary transformations, and that human potential, once unleashed, knows no boundaries. Arctic environments required entirely new approaches to shelter construction, clothing manufacture, and food preservation techniques. Tropical regions presented disease challenges that demanded medical knowledge and pharmaceutical techniques. Desert environments required water management and navigation skills that pushed human ingenuity to its absolute limits. But rather than fragmenting into isolated populations that gradually lost their technological and cultural advantages, these expanding human communities maintained extensive networks of communication and exchange that preserved and enhanced their collective capabilities. The genetic evidence reveals something remarkable about how these globally distributed populations maintained their enhanced abilities while also developing local adaptations. Rather than losing their technological edge to geographical isolation, human populations were actually accelerating their innovation through the diversity of challenges and opportunities presented by different environments. New technologies developed in one region could spread rapidly across continental networks. Cultural innovations and social organizational improvements could be tested, refined, and adopted by communities thousands of miles away through established trade and communication routes. Scientific and artistic discoveries could build upon previous achievements in ways that created exponential rather than linear progress. By 30,000 years ago, This network effect had produced human communities with capabilities that seem almost magical when compared to their bottleneck ancestors. Advanced tool technologies that could efficiently exploit virtually any environment on Earth, sophisticated social organizations that could coordinate complex projects across multiple generations and vast geographical distances, cultural and symbolic systems that could preserve and transmit enormous amounts of detailed information across time and space, artistic and philosophical traditions that explored abstract concepts and existential questions with increasing sophistication, scientific methodologies that could systematically investigate natural phenomena and develop reliable knowledge about how the physical world operates. The humans of this period had developed what can only be described as collective intelligence that far exceeded the capabilities of any individual, communities that could pool knowledge, coordinate specialized skills, and undertake projects that no single person or small group could possibly accomplish alone. Evidence of massive construction projects that required coordination of hundreds of workers over multiple years, trade networks that connected communities across entire continents and involved standardized measurement systems, quality control protocols, and sophisticated logistics management. Cultural institutions that could preserve and transmit complex knowledge systems across generations with remarkable accuracy. These achievements represent the emergence of civilization in its truest sense, not just larger populations or more complex tools, but qualitatively different forms of social organization that could harness collective human intelligence to achieve goals that transcended individual capabilities and lifespans. The genetic legacy of the bottleneck survivors had now spread across the entire habitable planet, but it was continuing to evolve and adapt in response to the increasingly complex challenges and opportunities created by human civilization itself. Selection pressures were no longer just about surviving in natural environments, but about thriving in the artificial environments that humans were creating through their own technological and social innovations. Modern genetic analysis reveals that many distinctively human traits underwent their final evolutionary refinements during this period of civilizational emergence. Enhanced cognitive abilities, sophisticated social cooperation, advanced technological innovation, and creative problem-solving all show genetic signatures indicating continued positive selection well into the period when humans were developing complex societies. The remarkable thing about this evolutionary process is that it was being driven not just by natural environmental pressures, but by the artificial selection pressures created by human culture and technology. Humans were literally evolving to become better at being human, developing enhanced capabilities that were specifically adapted to life in the complex artificial environments they were creating. By 20,000 years ago, human communities had developed capabilities that would have seemed absolutely impossible to their bottleneck ancestors. They were creating monumental architecture, developing sophisticated artistic traditions, establishing complex trade relationships, and beginning to develop the mathematical and scientific knowledge that would eventually lead to written language, formal logic, and systematic investigation of natural phenomena. But perhaps most remarkably, they were developing the social and organizational capabilities that would eventually enable the construction of cities, the development of agriculture, the establishment of complex governments, and all the other institutional innovations that define modern civilization. The cognitive and cultural toolkit that had first emerged from the crucible of the ancient bottleneck had been continuously refined and enhanced through hundreds of thousands of years of innovation and adaptation. Each generation had built upon the achievements of their predecessors, creating an accelerating spiral of advancement that was transforming not just human capabilities, but the entire planet itself. Today, when we look at the remarkable diversity of human achievements spread across every continent on Earth, we're seeing the ultimate expression of capabilities that trace their origins back to that tiny group of survivors who refused to accept extinction as their destiny. Every human language, every mathematical concept, every work of art, every scientific discovery, every act of compassion or creativity represents the culmination of the greatest comeback story in evolutionary history. The genetic memory of that ancient transformation continues to influence human potential in ways we're only beginning to understand. Recent research suggests that the enhanced cognitive abilities forged during the bottleneck recovery may still be evolving adapting to the increasingly complex challenges of modern technological civilization. We carry within our DNA not just the molecular evidence of humanity's closest brush with extinction, but also the genetic toolkit that enabled our species to transform that crisis into the foundation for unprecedented achievement and continuous growth. Every time we push the boundaries of what's possible, we're drawing upon capabilities that were first forged in the crucible of our species' darkest hour. The next time you witness human beings collaborating to solve complex problems, creating works of beauty and meaning, exploring dangerous frontiers, or caring for those in need, remember that you're observing the living legacy of 1,300 individuals who looked extinction in the face and chose instead to become the foundation for everything that makes human civilization possible. We exist because they survived. We thrive because they innovated. We achieve because every generation since has built upon their courage, their creativity, and their absolute refusal to accept limitations as permanent. The bottleneck that nearly destroyed us became the catalyst for the greatest transformation in the history of life on Earth. And that transformation continues today in each of us, in every choice we make to build rather than destroy, to create rather than consume, to dream of better futures rather than accept present limitations. From those 1,300 survivors who faced the ultimate test and refused to surrender, we inherited more than just the gift of existence. We inherited the power to imagine realities that don't yet exist and then bring them into being through determination, cooperation, and relentless innovation. Every skyscraper reaching toward the sky, every medical breakthrough saving lives, every work of art touching hearts, every scientific discovery expanding our understanding, every act of love and compassion connecting us across differences, all of these represent the ongoing expression of capabilities that were forged when our species stood at the brink of oblivion and chose to become something greater instead. We are living proof that from the darkest crisis can emerge the brightest possibilities, and that human potential, once unleashed by necessity and refined through generations of continuous innovation, truly knows no bounds. The transformation that began nearly 1,000,000 years ago continues today in every human being who refuses to accept that what is must define what could be. We carry forward the ultimate legacy of those ancient survivors, the unshakable knowledge that no challenge is too great for human imagination and determination to overcome. When courage meets creativity in the face of seemingly impossible odds, the story of our species is ultimately a story about the unlimited power of determination, innovation, and hope. 1,300 survivors became 8 billion dreamers, explorers, creators, and builders. That's not just survival, mine. That's the greatest success story ever told, written in the DNA of every person alive today and continuing to unfold with every human achievement that makes the world a little better, a little more beautiful, or a little more meaningful than it was before. But here's where the story takes its most incredible turn yet. Those 8 billion descendants of ancient survivors aren't just carrying forward the legacy of that miraculous recovery, they're actively pushing the boundaries of what it means to be human in ways that would have been absolutely unimaginable, even to the most visionary post-bottleneck communities. Consider what's happening right now in laboratories, universities, and research centers around the world. Scientists are literally rewriting the genetic code that was forged in the ancient crucible. They're developing technologies that allow us to edit DNA with precision that makes evolution itself look sluggish and crude by comparison. We're not just adapting to our environment anymore, we're redesigning our own biology. Gene therapies that can eliminate hereditary diseases that have plagued human families for thousands of years. Genetic modifications that could enhance cognitive abilities, extend lifespans, and protect against conditions that have limited human potential since our species first emerged from Africa. The same pattern recognition abilities that helped bottleneck survivors track animals and predict weather patterns have evolved into artificial intelligence systems that can process information faster than any human brain ever could. Machine learning algorithms that can identify patterns in datasets so vast that no individual human could possibly comprehend them. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about this technological revolution. It's not replacing human capabilities, it's amplifying them in ways that create entirely new categories of achievement. Humans working with AI systems can solve problems, create art, and make discoveries that neither could accomplish alone. We're witnessing the emergence of hybrid intelligence that combines the intuition, creativity, and emotional understanding that evolved during our species' recovery with computational power that can process information at scales our ancestors could never have imagined. This isn't just technological progress. This is the next phase of human evolution happening in real time. The space exploration programs currently under development represent something that goes far beyond anything our bottleneck ancestors could have dreamed. We're not just surviving on Earth anymore. We're actively planning to become a multiplanetary species that can spread human consciousness and creativity across the entire solar system and eventually beyond. Private companies are building rockets that can land themselves with precision that would have seemed magical to humans just decades ago. International space stations serve as laboratories where humans conduct experiments in conditions that don't exist anywhere on Earth. Plans are already underway for permanent settlements on Mars that will make humans a truly spacefaring civilization. But the most remarkable aspect of this cosmic expansion isn't the technology anymore, it's the mindset. The same refusal to accept limitations that enabled 1,300 survivors to rebuild an entire species is now driving us to refuse the limitation of being confined to a single planet. Medical breakthroughs are happening at an unprecedented pace, directly building on the enhanced immune systems and adaptive capabilities that emerged from the ancient bottleneck. We're not just treating diseases anymore, we're eliminating them entirely. Cancers that were death sentences for previous generations are becoming manageable, chronic conditions or even completely curable. The creative capabilities that first emerged as artistic expression in post-bottleneck communities have exploded into forms of beauty and meaning that our ancestors couldn't have conceived. Digital art that exists in virtual dimensions, music composed by AI systems working with human artists to create soundscapes that push the boundaries of what music can be, literature that adapts and responds to readers in real time, but perhaps most remarkably, we're seeing the emergence of global cooperation on scales that dwarf anything achieved by those ancient trade networks. When faced with challenges like climate change or global pandemics, humans can now coordinate responses involving billions of people across every continent, sharing resources, knowledge, and innovations at speeds that would have seemed impossible even to the most sophisticated post-bottleneck societies. The internet has created a form of collective intelligence that allows any individual to access the accumulated knowledge of our entire species instantly. A student in a remote village can learn advanced physics from the world's leading experts. A researcher in one country can collaborate with colleagues on every continent. An artist can share their vision with audiences spanning the globe. This represents the ultimate expression of the network effects that first emerged when post-bottleneck humans maintained communication across vast distances. But now, instead of connecting communities across continents, we're connecting minds across the entire planet in real time. The economic systems we've developed enable forms of cooperation and resource allocation that could support populations hundreds of times larger than those ancient survivor communities, while maintaining living standards that would have seemed luxurious beyond imagination to our bottleneck ancestors. Yet even as we celebrate these achievements, we're already pushing toward the next frontiers, quantum computers that could process information in ways that transcend the limitations of current technology, biotechnology that could enhance human capabilities in ways that make our current abilities seem primitive by comparison, energy systems that could provide unlimited clean power for civilizations spanning multiple planets. But the most profound transformation isn't technological peering, it's consciousness itself. We're developing forms of empathy and understanding that span not just individuals and communities, but entire species and ecosystems. Environmental movements that recognize our interconnection with all life on Earth. Rights movements that extend moral consideration to previously marginalized groups. Even early discussions about the rights and consciousness of artificial intelligences we might create. This represents the flowering of the enhanced social cooperation capabilities that first emerged during the bottleneck recovery, now expressing themselves as forms of compassion and inclusion that encompass not just human communities, but potentially all conscious beings. Every single person you'll ever meet, every face in every crowd, every human being on this planet, carries within their DNA the molecular signature of the most incredible comeback story ever written. We are all children of those 1,300 survivors who stared extinction in the face and chose to become the foundation for 8 billion dreams, innovations, and possibilities. From the brink of oblivion to reshaping reality itself, that's the true power of human determination. When courage meets creativity in the face of impossible odds, the transformation that began nearly 1 million years ago isn't ending with our current achievements. It's accelerating into possibilities that stretch beyond our current ability to imagine. We stand today not as the culmination of human potential, but as the latest chapter in an ongoing story of transformation that began with 1,300 individuals who refused to be the last and chose instead to become the first of something extraordinary and infinite. The greatest story ever told isn't finished. It's still being written by every person alive today who chooses to build rather than destroy, to create rather than consume, to dream of impossible futures and then make them real through the same courage, creativity, and determination that saved our species from extinction and transformed us into the architects of reality itself.